The average price of a house in California in September 2023 was over $843,000, according to the California Association of Realtors. But the average price of a condo in California was $650,000 for the same month. That's why the state of California is trying to allow homeowners to convert ADUs into condos. This creates more ownership opportunities at lower price points and hopefully helps more people own a home instead of rent. There are a ton of different variables to consider when you're comparing different types of housing, but fundamentally, single-family homes like this one and condos like the one we were just looking at are just fundamentally different types of housing. This, you're buying the house and everything else that sits on the lot. You're getting the whole property. When you buy a condo, you're not buying the whole property and everything that's on it. You're signing up with a very specific set of legal documents that define what exactly you own. You know, who's this parking belong to? Can you make modifications? Or do you just own what's inside the walls temporarily? All these things matter a lot. The devil's in the details. And that's why we're going to flip over to the office and talk to the VP of the board of the Casita Coalition, who helped lobby for this ADU condo bill. He's going to explain some of the things you really want to know before you go much farther down this road to figuring out what will it mean if there are ADUs turning into condos in your neighborhood. We're talking to Rafael Perez. He's the VP of the board of the Casita Coalition, which is a really instrumental group of professional ADU people and has been working on this legislation. So great person to say, hey, how's this supposed to work? Rafael, do you mind saying hi and telling us a little bit about yourself?
I'm Rafael Perez, the Vice President of the Casita Coalition, and we've been working along with the author to get Assembly Bill 1033 out there. I know there's a bunch of questions, but we have answers, and we think we've answered a lot of it in the bill, and a lot of it will ultimately be answered at the local level. But we're here for it. We're here to support cities and the state in making sure that this creates the opportunities we're hopeful it will.
Right off the bat, if you sell your ADU separately, if you're in a city that allows for it and you want to go do that, how is the title going to work? Who's going to own the land that the ADU's on? You know, how does this compare to a lot split, for example?
Yeah, so it's going to be just like a condo or a townhome that exists in other parts of the city where there's a homeowners association. And that homeowners association will have rules, and they'll have maps, and they'll have maps around other things like parking and storage. And they'll, in many cases, also have community space, right? So all of that will determine what you own and what you share. Each condo will have its own parcel number that's unique to itself, which will allow it to be able to get its own financing and its own title insurance and its own everything. And the other unit will have its own identification and parcel number and get its own. Who owns what is clearly mapped out, spelled out, and recorded with the county so that there's no doubt as to who owns what.
Yeah, so to get this far into the question, the homeowner has to have already created a tiny HOA where all these rules are spelled out and all the structures on that land are going to have their own APNs if like the ADU and the primary is going to have their own APNs, and other structures will be defined in the rules too. So like who gets to use the garage or whatever, that's all in there. Who gets to use the driveway, which is a good segue because about 1 million people asked what are the rules for street access? What are the rules for parking? What are the rules for shared driveways? And at the risk of saying, just like the condos, Rafael, what are those rules going to be?
Yeah, so I think part of that is going to come down to how permissive or inflexible cities want to be. Some cities may just say, hey, map it. If it's existing and it wasn't required to have parking, you can sell it. Other cities may have different rules, right? So it's really my answer is it depends on local ordinance. But let's just use the hypothetical situation where the city has no additional rules. They just say, yep, you can map it, do what you want. The way they map it is going to determine the market value, right? So if one of the units does not have parking, right, it may be a 5,000 square foot lot, with a one-car driveway. The garage that used to be there has been converted into the ADU, and there's only one off-street parking spot. So who gets that? Well, either the ADU that's turned the new Unit B gets it, or the original home gets it. That's up to the property owner who creates the map to determine. But that decision will also impact the market value of that unit, right? So just like, I think about, high-rise condos in downtown San Diego, right? 230 units with 180 parking spots or whatever, right? Some of those units don't have parking, and they are more affordable for that reason, right? And I think that it's going to be the same thing here, where the more you get, the more valuable the unit's going to be, and the less you have, the less valuable it's going to be and more affordable. So that may actually create some affordable opportunities to purchase that may not even exist in the price points that we see now, right? So there is trade-off, and a lot of that's going to be in affordability. And once again, I think that it's not going to create something that isn't already allowed, right? If that unit was able to be built without parking, it was already able to be built without parking. This didn't change that. This just allowed the person who occupies it to own it as well instead of rent it.
Yeah, so it's a great answer. Still based on the existing rules around ADUs, like what can be built, what needs to be done when it gets built. It's just changing the options for ownership that we have after that. Okay, cool. And then, so talk a little bit about lenders and lien holders, and like almost everybody's got, well, not almost everybody, but a lot of people have a mortgage. What do they have to do before they can go and start considering these HOAs, CCRs?
Yeah, so the mortgage is secured by the property, right? And the building and everything on there that is the collateral for the lender in case you default, right? That's what they'll foreclose on. So you can't go and create new things without the lender's consent. So there's several ways that looks like. One could be that you'll have sufficient equity where the lender is going to feel comfortable allowing you to move forward. They'll keep the lien on the property that's most valuable, or on both until it's paid. And that'll be a lender decision or servicer decision at that point, whether or not to allow a condo map to be recorded. It is required that the lender consent before that happens. So that's the first kind of safeguard, is the lender has to consent. If the lender does not consent, either you don't convert it into a condo, or you have to find a way to pay off the loan. The most common way people pay off loans are either by selling a property or by refinancing it, right? So that'll be the other option, is, okay, well, I'm going to get a new loan that will allow me to record it. Once I sell that unit, I'll pay off that loan and get a new lower mortgage or be mortgage free. Right, so that's kind of the other alternative for people that have a mortgage. And there is the big chunk of our state and our country that are mortgage free, and those tend to be people who have the flexibility and the resources and the capital to do a lot of this. So I think that's going to be another space that's you're going to see a lot of this happen in.
Yeah. And then for the other side of it, if I'm a home buyer and I want to buy one of these condoized ADUs, or maybe the primary, which has been parcel mapped to be its own separately conveyed thing, what kind of lending options should I be aware these are still available to me?
Right. So if you're buying the condo formerly known as ADU, then you're basically buying a condo, and there's in conventional financing, 1 to 4 unit condo complexes are exempt from some of the more rigorous condo approval processes that are out there that 5+ unit condo buildings need to go through. Right. They need to audit the minutes and look at the budget and look at all that. Well, 1 to 4 unit HOAs are exempt from that largely. They still have a minor process. So you will be able to go out and get a traditional conventional mortgage. FHA mortgages is going to be more reliant on the layout. So if it's a fully detached ADU where you can walk around the perimeter of it and there's no connection to the existing home, then it'll have a lot more feasibility with an FHA loan than something that is attached. But for even if it is attached, conventional financing will be available, based on the 1 to 4 unit condo rule that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac already have, and we have heard from FHFA that these current ADUs that'll be future condos will be eligible for that based on their rules at this moment in time. Obviously, check with the lender to make sure that the rules have not changed, but as of now, that's where we're at.
Yeah, this is one of those. This is not legal advice for your specific situation. This is not financial advice. Yeah,
Right.
but it's a great point that, like, this is complicated. There's federal regulation, there's institutional regulation like Fannie and Freddie, there's regional regulation, there's state regulation, and there's so many different ways that these can be shaped. Whether it's even if it's under 4 units or less, even if it's 4 units or less, you still have their split level, one on top of the other, or there's townhouses that share a wall, or they're 2 separate structures. Makes a big difference based on all these lending regulations. So work with professionals who are familiar with it and do their continuing education credits at the school ADU.
Yeah, but I think the exciting thing about that is it'll also create a bunch of different price points.
Yeah.
Right. So ADUs that are detached and have their own driveway and yard are going to be more valuable. They'll still be more affordable than a single family home, as we've seen in other areas where that exists. But then also the attached ADUs or the ADU above the garage or like those are going to be more affordable, just like a condo is more affordable than a single family home, right? One question that comes up in that space is, but isn't the value of the house going to go down? Right? If my house is worth $800,000, if I sell it separately, it's not going to be worth $800 anymore because I've already split off part of it. It's like, yes, and that creates more affordability, right? And I think ultimately, the important piece of that puzzle is you're not looking at the whole picture because, if the house was worth 800 and now that it's turned into a condo, it's only worth 700. Well, you just made it $100,000 more affordable. But on the other unit, the ADU, that may have cost you $200,000 to build, you may be able to sell it for $400,000. So you may lose 100 here, but you'll gain 100 here, right? So in the grand scope of things, it's not necessarily going to make the property value less, but independently, those units will be more affordable. And that's really our hope that's what happens, is that you create this more affordable home ownership inventory.
This is a good segue into a suite of questions we got about property taxes and like assessment values. I mean, every appraiser who's looking at this law is like, oh yeah, because there's going to be so many different kinds of structures, like you're saying, so many different price points. But how could this will the condoization trigger a reassessment in a way that's different than the ADU construction? And how are taxes handled ongoing? Does the new condo owner pay their own property taxes? How does that work?
So that's a complicated question. In California, each county's assessor has state law that they follow, but they also have a different scope on how they apply that law in their county. And we have Prop 13, right, that protects your property tax base. So, my answer would be talk to your local county assessor to see how it's being handled, and they'll be able to further guide you on that process. But generally speaking, the thing that re-triggers a reassessment is when you have a change of ownership. So when the ADU gets sold, it will trigger a reassessment, and that's clear, and that will result in more tax revenue for cities and counties, and that reassessment will deal with that. What's less clear at the moment is what happens to that existing parcel and how counties are going to handle that, because the number changed, but the owner's the same. So that's going to really come down to looking at how county assessors are going to handle that.
And that's great. And so anybody who's watching this, go talk to your county tax assessor and come back and tell us in the comments what they said. Because our hope is that county tax assessors don't reassess the primary just because you're mapping it and giving it its own APN. And the same question existed with lot splits on SB9. And so come back with real intel from the ground on how this is being enforced. It actually, I'll make sure Rafael and the Casita Coalition see it. And it's a great feedback loop. So cool. All right. And then taxes ongoing. It's you once you own a condo unit, you pay your own property taxes on it, right?
Yeah, so each parcel will have its own property taxes, which will then be protected by Prop 13, and it'll be based on your purchase price plus a small amount for inflation over time. But yeah, that once it's recorded, just like any other condo with a parcel number,
Yeah.
you'll have each one will have its own separate taxes.
Okay, now we're gonna get to the. I'm just gonna throw like 17 questions up, right? Because you saw them all. It's like, hey, how does this affect property lines? Sorry, actually, property lines, separate parcels, kind of its own thing. How does this affect easements, shared spaces like driveways, garages? What are reciprocal easements? Separate utilities? Do they get separate meters? Shared maintenance, catastrophic events, noise, quiet, postal services, and new addresses. I put all these together because I suspect Raphael's going to have one answer for all of them. So hit me, Raphael.
Yeah, I think there's two buckets we can look at. One is going to be how you determine your HOA's rules, CC&Rs, maps, right? How you develop this community. The other one is going to be what your local ordinance requires, right? So if your local ordinance does not, we'll talk about a meter, right? Let's just say XYZ city does not require separate water meters. Well, either you're going to have to find a way to sub-meter that, or the HOA is going to have to absorb that, which is going to result in higher HOA fees, which is a business decision that person will make, right? And if you have to have higher HOA fees so that the HOA pays the water, then that's also going to impact the affordability, right? Because now the ultimate buyer of that unit is going to have to qualify with a higher HOA payment to offset that water, which means less resale value, right? So it may be a business decision for that property owner to install that separate meter, go through the expense, because they may have a more valuable product at the end of the line. Or it may be that the city just says, well, if you want to do a condo map, you need to put separate meters, right? So that's one area where it's going to be a mix of local ordinance and business decisions. So for starters, and then the driveway amenities, once again, it's going to be a mix, right? Everything's going to be a mix of local ordinance and business decisions, right? So, I'm thinking, okay, if I had a single family home with an ADU and, I'm going to sell the ADU to be able to pay off my mortgage and live mortgage free and have more financial freedom. Well, I'm going to determine several things, right? If the owner's still going to be living there, they're going to want to make sure that they keep whatever they need to still fully enjoy their home the way they're used to enjoying it, right? So that may require some yard or all of the yard, or some kind of reconfiguration of adding fences and yards, and so that's going to be a homeowner decision based on what's more important, right? Enjoyment of the property or maximizing the value of what they're selling. So that can also come into play when a local city creates their ordinance. They may mandate what that yard split looks like, or they may not, right? So it's either going to be a business decision or a local ordinance, or some combination of the two.
Makes
And I
sense.
think that's going to be the answer for most of these, is a combination between business decisions and local ordinance is going to ultimately determine what these look like in your city.
Yeah, and there's almost always a precedent, and it's super complicated, right? Compared to ADUs, which you can kind of cowboy your way through the ADU permitting process, even if it's your first development. But like to have CC&Rs and to like create an HOA and to do a parcel map, like you're going to be working with a very team of professionals there's a cost to that, right? Like, and you gotta. This isn't a one page over the counter. This is gonna be a process. Do you have an idea of how much time and money it takes to do these kinds of things, like at a minimum?
I don't know what the cost is in other states where this is already happening,
Hmm.
but I do know that it's not going to be a DIY thing for most people. Number one reason is because this is subject to the Davis-Sterling Act, which is very complicated and complex, and it determines what's required for a condo association. But people who are experienced in working in the space already have, general templates or kind of a starting point that they can then modify and adapt, right? So the way I see this is sort of like when people go and do something themselves legally versus hiring an attorney. Yeah, one is going to save you money, but the ultimate cost down the end of the road is it may be more costly and may create some liability and have
Hmm.
more issues. So our advice: talk to an attorney. We're not the pros here. Talk to the pros. We're going to be able to walk you through what the investment costs and requirements are all going to be.
It makes a ton of sense, right? Because you're giving up a lot of future rights by selling a condo in your backyard, where that homeowner could sell it again. They could lose it in a game of poker. They get like anything, and so you want to have a really solid foundation for all the objective, enforceable rules, and you need a lawyer to do that. Who's going to be able to follow all that? Cool. I think. Is
I think my
there?
favorite question,
Yeah, go
just
ahead.
one of the questions I saw on your TikTok page that I had a great answer for is, what happens if you sell the ADU and then they sell it? Answers, you get a new neighbor, right? Like,
Yeah.
just like you have no control over what your next door neighbor does with their property.
Yeah.
Once you sell it, it's theirs to do as they wish with, and you get a new neighbor.
Yeah, it's true. That's the stick. That's the shtick. um, I think so. To that extent, like it's important to acknowledge somebody in those TikTok comments also asked like, hey, what prevents developers from doing this as an ADU, renting it out as an ADU, and then all of a sudden selling it out from under the tenants? And that's kind of the same thing. It's the same as normal tenant protection, right? There's
Right.
no extra protection for these units. It follows the rules.
Yeah, so they'll have to go follow the same rules that apply to any other tenant in any other legally rentable space in California, right? There's going to be no fault eviction laws, and there's going to be, rules in place that either local or state rules that will have to be followed. Notice will have to be given, but somebody can sell it with the tenant, and you'll just have a new landlord who would basically inherit your existing lease, right? So
Yeah.
that's possible, but it doesn't mean that tenant isn't protected by their lease and whatever is written into that.
Yeah. And to that same extent, I think if you're watching this, especially if you're a tenant, and you feel like you're in a CC&R that is being abused in a way to gang up on you or to violate the spirit of a fair housing law, that you would follow the same recourse that we recommend no matter what the housing type is, right? You find a housing advocate, find somebody who can work with you and your housing provider to like get you to a good resolution, right? These are just houses. They're homes like any other homes.
Yeah, but speaking of fair housing, I think that's another exciting component of this is, right, you're creating new home ownership opportunities in many communities that haven't had new home ownership opportunities for decades, right? It's whatever was built is what's there, and if they stuck an ADU, it was a rental. But now you're opening up that door for a new product in communities that haven't had something new for sale in a long time.
Yeah.
And I think that's exciting because it gives people access to new communities that they may not have had access to. And I think that, as communities have more diversity and more, um, you know, equitable outcomes, I think we'll all be better for that.
Now that you got the answers to all the frequently asked questions, we did an interview with a lawyer who's done thousands of these in Texas, and it's a really good illustration of how this process can work at scale. So check that out, and you'll get a real clear illustration that answers a lot of your other questions.